In the 2019 movie, The Farewell was released in theaters. It starred Awkwafina and was centered around a cultural practice some Westerners find hard to believe. When an elderly grandmother or grandfather becomes terminally ill, you don't tell them. Knowledge of this illness lowers quality of life, allegedly. In the movie, they schedule a wedding as an excuse to fly the family to China to see Grandma before she dies. One movie critic on Twitter called it an unbelievable, ridiculous premise, not realizing it's an actual cultural practice. In 2021, 2 death row inmates tried to sue Osaka government for $500,000. They claim not knowing when they die is, quote, mental agony. This happened again last year, too, when another pair of Japanese men on death row tried to sue the government over their inhumanity of not being told their execution date. They served their entire sentence without knowing until just a few hours before they walked to the gallows. They're woken up and marched through the cell block. This is a common practice in Japan. A prisoner sentenced to death might spend decades in solitary, not knowing when their time is up, until the sentencing is carried out. Other cultures have similar practices. In South Korea, it was common for doctors to call the family of a terminally ill patient after a bad scan, but not the patient. In some parts of Russia, the first call from the doctor is to the family, not the dying man or woman. In India, withholding information about terminal illness is done with both cultural and religious beliefs in mind. In all these instances, the idea of dying well and not causing unintentional grief is of the foremost concern, but is not knowing really saving anyone. To quote the French writer and critic Marcel Proust, we may indeed say that the hour of death is uncertain, but when we say so, we represent that the hour to ourselves is situated in a vague and remote expanse of time. It never occurs to us that it may have any connection with the day that has already dawned. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-duh on the internet.
When we were children, our parents sometimes shielded us from adult hardships. That could mean not telling us when money was getting tight, or not explaining violent events. It could mean changing the channel when something unpleasant comes on, or leaving out details when there's a family fight. We expect this sort of filtering as children, but is it healthy for us, for adults? That's our existential topic of the day. Is it better to know the hour of our death, or remain oblivious? What about the other types of awful news? Myth 1. As Americans, how much do we shield each other? Our medical system is pretty transparent, but what about genetic tests? If 23andMe uncovered a highly likelihood for Alzheimer's or Huntington's, would you want to know? Myth 2. Can not knowing the hour of execution save our mental grief? Or is it easier on overseas prison systems to keep inmates in the dark? We're going to get to our myths, but first I want to talk to Joe about genetic tests.
Out of curiosity, because you seem like the type of person who would want to know your historical background, where you came from, that kind of stuff. Have you taken one of the genetic tests?
I haven't, but my mom is such a geek on that stuff. Because she was adopted, she's just very obsessed with what everybody is. I don't care. I could kind of tell that I'm Eastern European trash. Just from looking at myself in the mirror. Are you one of those that wants to say I'm a quarter Irish and you're just like a full blown drunken Irishman to me is what you look like?
Well, that is both more accurate than I was expecting, both from you and from the genetic test I took. I took one for medical reasons. I didn't really care what I was. My whole family is obsessed with it. Like my father especially. He didn't have a father in his life. So he was like, he wanted to know. He's like, what am I, percent French? I'm a 32nd Native American. He's one of those people where he found out he might be like 2% Native American, and suddenly he just had like beads all over the place.
He was identifying as a Native American off the
right. He was telling me we got to take care of the sacred spirits, and I was like, dude, calm down.
The white man has stolen all of my land. You're like, Dad, yeah.
We're Irish, yeah.
I had a similar, because I did through my mom, though. She did find out that I was Czechoslovakian and Yugoslavian, right? And so it's kind of interesting. It is interesting, right?
I would not have guessed that, but that now that you say it, that kind of makes sense.
Does that count as European trash? Yeah, I think it does.
I think so. Eastern Bloc-ish, yeah. It's all one. I'm American. Geography is one smear to me. Just it's. Well, okay. So here's the second part of that. If you took a test like that and it revealed that you had like Huntington's or Parkinson's or something that is incurable and will plague you later in life, would you want to know? Because it actually does ask that question. It says, do you want this information revealed to you?
This is so funny that you bring this up, because I'm a documentary geek, and I love the death row documentaries, and they were saying that about death row inmates are they're the only ones that know when they would die. I think I would want to know, and the reason I would is I work better with deadlines, as you know, and I think I would get more done, and I think I would appreciate. There's a Tim McGraw country song, "Live Like You Were Dying," and it's about his father who gets cancer and goes out and does everything on his bucket list. But I don't know. I don't know if I would just go into fear, and I've seen people who are find out they have stage 4 cancer and just are miserable.
Yeah.
They die fast, and I think a lot of it's mental.
Yeah, I don't know. Knowing when you might or when you could die, that's the whole subject of today. It's both death but also harsh news. How much does shielding each other help?
I had a good friend of mine, Joe, and he went in for cancer treatment and this is what he told me. He said he was shocked at how much of it the doctors talked to him about goodness in you, and goodness meaning no more junk food, all quality, whole foods, natural foods. And then another thing was very big on self-talk and the people around you and being positive. He said it was so Tony Robbins-y, he was surprised that it wasn't just medical. A lot of it was psychology.
But they've almost standardized it in the industry. They've almost like adopted it, even at like technical professional levels.
So they must work then. They must have some power.
I think so, yeah.
Experts wouldn't do that, right?
I was a fool. I'd say both a fool and perhaps I maybe didn't care enough at the time. I clicked the yes button. I wanted to know what kind of weird stuff was going to come at me later. And I think that probably everybody has something. Like they have a screening for, it's like 2 genetic markers where it's like it reveals whether or not you could have cancer, like a higher rate of it. There's a genetic marker for Huntington's. I apparently have the one for Parkinson's. It's low risk, so like don't start planning a new writer for your show yet. But yeah,
it scares you a little bit though. Parkinson's is a terrible disease, right?
I think the first moment I got the news back, like I froze up, like my heart dropped, and I kind of like I got tunnel vision, like I couldn't see out of my peripheral for a second. I was just so like devastated.
It was a baseball bat to the face then.
Oh, absolutely. It was shocking because I was like, I've never heard of that in my family. And then I thought about it and I was like, well, nobody has made it past like 65 or 70, so it's possible that they just hadn't gotten it yet. But then I started thinking about it. I was like, it didn't say high risk, and it's a long way away. I can try to, be healthy and do as best I can until then, because it's unavoidable. So that I went very stoic. Like it took me It took me, I'd say, an hour or two before I was like, oh, right. I actually believe in Stoicism. And I'm like, yeah, it's not something I can change. So I will continue as if, But that's my reaction is not going to be everybody's. That's the fun part is like when I recommended this movie to you, I was like, I think that more encompasses the normal reaction.
Well, let me tell you about this movie. It's called The Farewell. It's called The Farewell, and it's about Aquafina, and she's Chinese. Her family immigrated here when she was a little girl into the United States. And they're going back. This movie it's a wonderful movie, and it's one of the few movies I've ever seen. I cried 4 times, and I almost peed my pants laughing 4 times. So it has that emotional range.
It's a roller coaster.
It really was, and it's got some good auntie stories, where you have the know-it-all grandma aunties, no matter what ethnicity, they're all the same. And there's a lot of symbolism, and there's a lot of cultural differences that are hard for people to understand. It's hard for an American to understand these, and I think they did a good job kind of taking us through that journey, don't you?
I think so. I think that I think it was very smart for them not to have an American character being the Watson, being the eyes that we see it through, but having an Americanized Chinese person. So they knew most of it, but they also got to explain some of it to me, the dumb audience member. I think it was helpful.
Well, and then the kids who were raised in the United States who didn't understand and were pushing back. So that they had every side of it. There's a lot of symbolism in the movie, and it's something if you really watch it and just really give it your undivided attention, it's very enriching. It really makes you think.
Yeah. So if
we
haven't,
a family love story is what it is. Because people, our first for being Western, the first thing we think as Americans is how could you? That's being but it's not.
So. Can we ask that as a question for you and I? Again, I hate to turn everything into a conversational today, but this is what piqued my interest. If you had a family member who, like, say you had a grandparent and they had a terminal illness, they had been diagnosed, and you had to apparently fly to Czechoslovakia. Am I getting that right? Or maybe just Maine. Maybe
Yugoslavia is no longer. So yeah, I think wherever, Romanian or whatever. Yeah.
or maybe you just have to go to like the East Coast or something. And you had to like show up, and the whole family wants you to pretend they don't have an illness or don't tell them. By the way, that was the original title for the movie is Don't Tell Her. I didn't know that, but in China, that's what it debuted as is Don't Tell Her. But say you had to show up and you had to pretend to a grandparent with a terminal illness that they're fine so that you can play act this whole like birthday party or a wedding or something to say goodbye without actually telling them goodbye. Do you think you'd be able to like emotionally do that?
I couldn't, but none of the men in my family could. We're too emotional. You could tell. We're not good. We are not good poker players. We wouldn't be able to. I mean, at my grandfather's funeral, the men in my family were crying very hard, and I've never seen them cry before. They just can't handle that. We're not good with this mortality. What about you?
Okay, that's interesting. So if you don't think you could do it because of an emotional aspect, I would probably be the one to spill the beans, not out of emotion, just out of stubbornness, out of believing in like, no, you tell people the truth so they can make a informed decision.
You get on your moral high horse over there, huh, Joe?
I live on a moral high horse. Like I'm like that old Western painting where it's like the cowboy slumped over on his horse, except it's me on morals and everybody around me is tired of hearing it.
Well, it would be hard for us because we are kind of independent and we are older. That's why the movie was very cool because it explained the parents still had authority over the children to tell them, hey, don't tell her that, they put their thumb down, and you can't do that with everybody of every age. People get to a certain age, they're going to do what they want. And some people, we all have those family members that, are so direct and honest that they like to devastate everything in their path. And I don't think you're that way.
I was going to say, you're describing me.
But I think you think you're doing the right thing by telling them, and they're not doing the right thing by keeping it a secret.
Right. So what they refer to that in this movie is it's a good lie. The idea that if In fact, that is a quote they have in it that they say, quote, when people get cancer, they die. It's not the cancer that kills them, it's the fear. And do you think that that's true of anything in real life? Like, is there any sickness, illness, maybe even just poverty? Maybe like, do you ever remember as a kid your parents keeping like bills, or like you're gonna have to move out soon, but you're not told because they think that the knowledge of it will cause undue strain?
God bless my parents. They were the worst on the other extreme. It was always, we had no money. It was even when we did. There was no Christmas gift presents this year. There's always these warnings and these threats. And they weren't really threats. They were like these, but it never came. So they kind of lost credibility, right? We were comfortable, you know, but for them to be claiming poverty and this is the end of the world. And then when you get grown up, you're kind of like, you know, there's not that many consequences. There are some.
Right.
But I think we can see by the present political people that you can pretty much do whatever you want.
Right.
And it's okay in the long run. Were you raised like that? I mean, did you think your parents protected you? I think your parents just let you kids suffer, right?
My first experience, so I lived with my father and his side of the family most of my life. They didn't protect us from anything. Like, it was, you heard the parent conversations. They got deep and they got weird, and they were often like laden with undiagnosed anxiety disorders. My whole family was. So there was oftentimes talk of like, well, probably gonna have to like rush out and move in the middle of the night again. Like it was so normal to air out all of your worst worries, and it turned the kids into anxiety-ridden messes. Like, I'm not going to say that's helpful.
Yeah, because you have to filter out, and I think there's dangers in being too honest with people. You know, you don't, someone, you know, you love Rachel and I love Joanne. We're not too honest. You know what I mean? You got to protect your people's feelings too, right? And keep them feel secure and safe.
I've honestly learned that from you and from watching other people who are smarter than I. When I started this relationship, it was very much like I was just upfront about everything I was feeling. Like, it was just like, why wouldn't I say it? This is, and I realized very quickly it's unloading anxiety onto somebody else for no reason. It doesn't benefit them at all. But if it's an informed decision, I still stand by that. If like, okay, so what would you share, like with Joanne? Like, what's something that falls under the I wouldn't share it, and what's something that falls under the I would share it?
If I have any kind of hardship, like, you know, if I get fired from a job or something bad happens, I'm going to tell her right away. And the only reason is I'm afraid if I let it go, I won't have the provide. I'll be too afraid to do it later. And as time goes by, it becomes a bigger lie, you know.
Okay. I think that's a good reason, like doing it for the sake of honesty.
But I don't burden her with my everyday troubles. And I'll tell you why. You know, women say they don't like men to be fixers. Women can be 10 times as worse, Joe. Then I kind of feel disrespected because then she acts like my problems are so trivial. Oh, just do this and this. It's like, oh yeah, I thought of that, babe. Thanks. Like, I haven't given this some thought. I've lost sleep. I've lost hair. I've lost years off my life.
Right.
It's just that simple. What about you? What's off limits and what's on?
I think sharing about concerns about things dealing with money, I think absolutely share them, because that's oftentimes my concern. Even though honestly I don't have any problems right now, it's more just like I was raised to look ahead as far as possible and worry about everything along the way. But it means prudent planning, like sharing that stuff. I'm gonna skip ahead a bit to like our science points. That's the reason for sharing hardships in life with children and with people and with loved ones, is it builds resilience. There is a large sect of psychology right now that is like pro-resilience building. The idea that face adversity.
It calluses the kids. I've been through this. I can do this.
Yeah, it shows people that yes, you can have a problem, but more importantly, you can get past it. Here's the process we use. If you demonstrate the process for getting past obstacles and even just hardships that there's no curing or fixing. It's a demonstration to the children that you can bring it together. Like you can outlast it. You can day-to-day it. I try to share things now in my relationship that will be, that will work toward resilience. I have stopped so much. Like, I still talk about it, but my own anxieties with like writing, I will frequently just be up at night being like, because I'm built to worry. Like it is I have both depression and anxiety, and I deal with it professionally. Not I'm a professional. I have gotten professional help for it, but I will still sort of like dwell on the fact that like an artificial intelligence will probably replace all writers in the next 20 years, and what am I writing next? Can I actually do it? Like do I have the chops for whatever I'm working on? And those things I have realized are better left unsaid, because there's nothing they can help with, and it's not an informed decision, and it's not building resilience. Like it's only my anxiety, and I will share it if it is emotionally affecting me. Like I'll say, I'm feeling hung up today, I'm a little bit anxious or something, but I don't need to go into crazy detail about it.
But isn't that okay? So let's unpack this a bit. When you in a healthy relationship, it's important to build trust, and you build trust by being transparent, right?
Yeah.
So that's very important. But what's not good is and I know this from personal experience, when I verbalize things and start to feel them and give them more time probably than they deserve, you end up living the same traumas more times. So instead of being worried about your taxes one time, you end up living it 80 times, and then it never turns out to be as bad as you thought it was going to be.
Right.
Right. And you and I have had that with all our affairs, right?
I think that's been my experience. I think
we worry ourselves physically sick over something that most of the time doesn't even come to be.
I was about to say it's when you get to it. I've seen you do this where you will step by step it. Like you'll reach out, get help, you'll work the problem, and then get over it. I will try to do the same, but once you get past it, you're like, oh my God, I just ate up 3 months of my life worrying about it and 1 week dealing with it.
It's just such a time burglar, and we don't know how much time we have. We don't know. We don't know.
A psychologist might be listening to this and be like, you guys are idiots. But yeah, the idea that you would share enough to show that you're having a process and that you are dealing with something, and that, if you can involve them in part of the solution, would you say that's worth doing?
I think so. I think it does. And on the part about the psychologist, trust me, I've had my fair team of psychologists, and these $550 an hour. What do you want to talk about today, Todd? I say, you know what? I want to talk about the New England Patriots. You're the one that makes $550 an hour. You're the one with a degree on the wall. Why don't you lead me down this trail, okay? I don't need a $550 an hour friend.
Right, yeah. There's one last thing that I want to sort of like bring up. It was the woman who did this, Lulu Miller. Awkwafina was the actress. Lulu Miller was the writer and the one who chose to do this, like chose to make the movie. And she originally just had this as a story on This American Life. That's where it kind of debuted, is she was just sharing about her weird experience. Like her nai got sick, and she had to go and like pretend that she didn't know that it was a terminal illness. Like they just showed up and they're like, hey, we're going to have a wedding, and just try not to be emotional. And then afterward, she made the movie, and like Disney pitched her a couple versions. She rejected Disney, like which is crazy to think about. And then she started producing the movie. They made it, and like every level of them making this movie, her grandma, weirdly, they didn't tell her. They kept the secret from her, by the way. This is a spoiler if you want to know whether the grandma dies or not. In real life, they were in the middle of making this movie, and they're like, oh my God, she's still alive. And also every step of it, they're like, well, she probably won't see the news. Like, it's an American thing right now. It's fine. And then like it got bigger, and they're like, well, it's going to Sundance, but like it's an award. Grandma probably won't see it from in China. Like that'd be weird if she was watching Sundance. And then it got bigger, like it went to China, and they're like,
they're trying to shield her from this, but eventually it's gonna find her some way, right? Grandma's learning how to use the internet now,
right? No, that's exactly what happened. She actually did find out about it because she was in like the New York Times or something. The movie was, and that's translated in China, and she's like, is this movie about me? She's like, it's literally called Don't Tell Her. And they filmed it in our hometown.
You could just see her going, motherfuckers.
Right, exactly. And she passed away the very next day from finding. No, she didn't. From last I heard from an interview with Lulu Miller, her Nana was still alive. But I mean, like that, I don't know. We're gonna.
How angry would you be if you found out? Would you be like, "Oh, thanks, guys"? If I did that to you, Rachel did that to you, your brother did that to you, would you be like, "Oh, you guys, thanks for thinking of me"? Or would you be like, "What the hell"?
No, they would die before me. Like I would be so mad. Like I would.
there'd be a death murder list.
Right.
You're just thinking about it. That didn't take you long to think of that. Oh no, they must die.
No. They know that like my moral beliefs are like very sort of like stoic, and I also believe in, like I said, informed decisions. I would be very mad. I would be so upset. How about you?
You'd feel like you were cheated out of all that depression and worry.
Right.
You'd be like, that's my given right. I like being miserable.
Guys, misery is how I fuel writing. Like I don't get to make a story if I'm not miserable at some point.
I'm telling you, the farewell, you really start cheering for the grandma, and the grandma is that bossy old grandma that we all have, that know it all. And there's a part in the movie that really cracked me up where she's arranging a fake wedding, but she doesn't know that. She thinks this is why everyone's here, is for this wedding. And she's bossing everybody around, the caterers, and the daughter is like, why can't we tell her? And the dad's like, look, she's happy. She's bossing everybody around.
That's what she likes it.
It was actually the auntie that said that. Look, she loves this. She's bossing everyone around. She's never been happier.
I think there's so many layers to the meaning there. Like one is she, joking about her being happy that she's bossing people, but she must have thought everybody was just being very lazy and depressed. Like she's like, why is everyone else letting me do all this work? So, okay, I gotta ask, how much would you shield bad news from people? Like let's go through the layers of this. Like, what are the levels of you'd shield or you wouldn't shield somebody? You know my answer to a grandparent or a spouse, which is I would basically tell them anything so that they could be informed.
I wouldn't want to tell. I don't like to tell kids about death of pets. That's a tough one for me. They went to the farm or they went someplace else, I'd like to try to keep them from that, because that's something that's a real grief thing. I had a situation when I was young. I went to my great-grandmother's funeral, and I was little, I was 8 or whatever, a little kid, and my grandfather was very mean to me because I was playing and but I was a kid, I didn't understand it. But he was kind of he was really being hard on me that I had to act a certain way, and I didn't think that was, as I grew up, I think it was wrong. They're little kids, they run around, they don't know, you know what I mean?
Right.
But I try to keep kids away from sex stuff before their time, obviously.
Okay.
And then death of pets, and just death of probably of adults as well.
Okay. I think that when it comes to pets dying, I would absolutely tell them, just so that they know what that process is, that it exists. Like teach them to emotionally process it as it happens. And I think that is probably, I don't know, that might be crazy for me to think that that's doable with kids, that you can teach them processes like that. Like, hey, you're 2, your goldfish just died. Let's teach you early on. Here's a micro version of the grief process that you'll have to face with people. I wouldn't say that, by the way. I'm not completely sociopathic, but what about if they got sick? Would you tell, what age would you tell a child that they had a terminal illness at?
And that's one that's a sensitive one. I always say the only people I really feel bad for are kids with cancer, and I think you have to. When there's these doctor's visits, you have to explain to them and things they understand why they have to go
Yeah.
and do this, all this stuff, why they have to miss school, why they can't go to this thing, why they have to stay home and rest, why there's put needles in their arm or a port in their chest, you know. And when I see that, you see the parents of the kids with cancer. It's actually harder on them. It's killing them. I mean, it's absolutely killing them just for their kid to be so healthy. And they do the best they can, but people don't always understand, and it's not just a kid thing. I've seen people who are in their 70s and 80s who can't understand their own mortality. They can't believe it. They're like, last year I was skiing and snowboarding, and now this. How? God, why?
Yeah. Uh, Actually, that's a very interesting and weird thing. I've met those people who are older who have not had a health scare yet, and they don't seem to understand it when they have something catastrophically go wrong.
Right.
Do you
And
do you think
they've had it happen in the family and with their parents, but they just don't get it.
that plays into it? Maybe like if there is a good argument for keeping a terminal illness from a grandmother or aunt or uncle, maybe it's the people who wouldn't truly like it. You don't think they'd be able to fight it?
If you could pick those out, I think when things are extreme, you just don't know how people are going to react. Some people, and you've seen this, some people just get hard as steel, and some people don't. Some people surrender, and some people fight it. But I haven't seen a pattern. Like, oh, this person was a great athlete, or this person was a CEO. I've seen them commit suicide over that. People who are leaders and educated. Then I've seen people who fight right to the
Right.
end and are brave. So I don't know how you would pick. I think, and we don't know. I don't think we even know how we think we know how we would react. See,
Yeah.
I think you'd come to terms with it real fast. I think you would, and then you get busy researching and you stay busy just preparing yourself.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. At any time, I mean, I've had a couple health scares, and it becomes sort of a step by step, like you said, research, and then I almost treat it like it is like IKEA assembly, like it's
Yeah. You get
there are
over the
steps
one.
to this. Yeah,
Yeah, you try to get over the first hump, right? You try to feel a little bit better, and that's all you think about. You don't think about when you and I had our heart problems, we weren't thinking about getting ready for the next Olympics. We're like, can I, can I eat something without my heart rate pounding out of my chest?
right.
I mean, we had real low goals to get better.
Can I sweat less when I eat?
Yeah, exactly. Can I not be gray and green? Can I
Right.
have a flesh tone? I'm not making fun. This is true. We had this problem.
Yeah. I think it's hilarious you brought up the country song. I actually heard that on the radio a couple weeks ago, and I was like, oh yeah, no, I've had that experience in the light version, the beer light, the Bud Light version of Live Like You're Dying. Um, how old would you, if we're gonna put like an age on it? What about like losing a house or a divorce? Because those are both things that I experienced when I was younger. I think you experienced one of those. Am I correct?
Oh, I've done all those, yeah, multiple times. Yeah. Um, what's the question?
How old should a kid be before you tell them we're going to lose a house or we're going to get divorced?
The divorce one's right away. You got to kind of prepare them for the separation, and things are going to be different because it's so hard on them. The house thing, I think, is okay for me to keep it sheltered from them because I don't think kids care about as much of stuff as parents do.
Yeah.
I think emotionally and health wise, I think it's important to tackle those right away. But stuff, losing stuff, or Christmases, or where we're going to live, is those things take care of ourselves. You can tell the kids we're going to go on an adventure and live in a smaller place, and it's going to be great. And they're going to
Kids
go
will
to a
live in a
school.
circus tent if you tell them it's going to be fun.
Yeah, but the parents, if we show grief over it, they're gonna match that match those feelings.
I think that's a pretty good point. Is a lot of it is, do we demonstrate the process? Like if we demonstrate panic, like my parents did, the kids are going to panic, obviously. And if you demonstrate a process where you are going to solve something or you'll get over something, like if you demonstrate that there's progress, then I think that helps. So do you want to get into the actual the big what do you call it, the big spoiler in the sky, the big one on whether or not patients actually make it longer if they don't know?
Yeah, what's the math here? What are the stats?
So this is only speaking for the terminally ill patients. We will get into death row statistics. So like we're talking generally about if someone knows they're going to die, how does it affect them? Does it actually make their life shorter because they know that the end is coming? The way they worked this out is there was a study that they did where they followed ICU patients who knew they were going to die or that they were going to die, and they were in palliative care, or they were like, they had already received a terminal prognosis in their doctor's paperwork, like their clipboards, but maybe they didn't know yet. So they followed the National Cancer Center in Korea, followed these people around with questionnaires, basically, and they got data from 619 consecutive patients immediately after they were determined by a physician to be terminally ill, and they followed them around. They either followed them for 6 months after the enrollment and saw how they had assessed their own survival, or they followed them to the end, like they followed them to the 481 that made it. And excuse me, I misspoke. In a follow-up of 481 patients and 163 person years, they identified 466 deceased patients. So 19% of the patients died within 1 month, 41% lived for 3 months, 17 lived for 6. So like, when I say they were following terminally ill patients, they were following people with a very short amount of time. Like this is not a longevity study. They were checking on people right before they sort of met their end.
That makes a difference too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All diseases are not the same at the same stages.
Right. So the reason I spent so much sort of like boring, painful minutes explaining that, it's because in our actual movie, The Farewell, now that I know the real life version of Nai, Aquafina / Lulu Miller's grandma, actually lived to see the movie come out, now I'm like, oh, they are not really like apples to oranges as far as like how long they made it. Because I don't think that proves that not knowing allowed her to live longer. Because after reading the study, the conclusion was, spoiler, patients who were aware that they were dying and entering palliative care, or in the ICU, wherever they were, however they were entering it, knowing did not affect their survival rates or their time, or it didn't seem to influence their mood very much. Because one of the key parts of this is near the end, they knew anyway. Like if you are dying and like your body starts to fail, like it may have made them feel differently briefly for the period of time where they could have been told. Like say your family keeps it from you, you maybe have a little bit extra time where you don't suspect anything's wrong with your body. But when you lose eyesight, or when you become progressively more ill and you're bedridden, or if your body locks down, or you just feel like you and I, we had blood pressure was the big one for me. And that's a silent killer. Like you don't know until things start to fail or go wrong. And when they do, you can tell, like even if you don't have a diagnosis yet, something's terribly wrong. So, sorry to inject my own little rant into this, but yes, conclusion was obviously it didn't matter. Like telling them, not telling them, it didn't affect the speed of death. It only affected how well they prepared for it.
So then that goes to who is this for? It's like kind of going to when you go to a funeral to honor a person who's passed, right? We're not really honoring them, we're honoring us, right? It's for us. The funeral's for us.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's like, is that the lesson out of all of this? Is that we get to see that person not scared and not in pain just for a little bit, just to kind of, we've all had this experience of seeing somebody who we loved for many years, who's passed, who's sick and old, and you just wish they were the way they used to be. And you tell people they weren't always like this. They were strong and young and smart. And
I when my grandmother passed, a lot of family members kind of stayed away a little bit, and I believe it's because they wanted to, like, her faculties kind of went, and she kind of acted a little bit batty, and she was having congestive heart failure, so it messed with the oxygen levels in her brain, and I realized that some people just wanted to remember her how she had been, and honestly, if we didn't tell her she had a disease, and then we invited everybody to say goodbye without her knowing, they would have had that. They would have had that mental snapshot of her basically in her latest prime before she went. I don't know if that's fair.
Yeah, I kept to cut you off. My grandfather was a horrible alcoholic, and his disease progressed worse and worse, and he lived into his 80s, and he was miserable. He was just miserable, and he made everyone. He had a lot of people that loved him, and he alienated him from everybody. But what really surprised me about when he knew when his liver was gone, and things just started falling off of him, and he knew he didn't have much time, was how frightened he got. He was such a mean man in every way. But to see him become so humble about his health, I don't think anything humbles you like a health scare. And certainly not. I mean, to the point where he's calling me, telling me he loved me. That guy didn't tell me he loved me for 30-something years. I don't think he even thought it until he was on not that he didn't care for me, but you know what I mean? He was not a I love my grandson kind of guy until he had one foot in the grave. And it just changes you. So maybe that's worth it, right? To get some kind of sweetness, to squeeze some sweetness out of these old bastards.
I like that. I like the way you put it more. I was more thinking it might be good to show younger people the humility and universal humility that death brings to us. That
But I don't think you understand it when you're young because you don't think it's going to happen to you.
Yeah, even if you see it.
Yeah, I don't think. I think aging is only you understand when it happens to you. I think you think, I'm going to somehow avoid this. In your fantasy world that you live in, or your fantasy writer, shit, you probably think you're some sort of a Dracula or something. I don't know.
Lich, yeah, no, I'm.
You think you're gonna live forever?
Yeah, the word is lich. It's when somebody becomes so smart they become undead and they're unkillable.
That's what it is.
Yeah,
you're gonna think your way out of this.
Speaking of big brains trying to think their way out of death. Did you hear about the Japanese inmates that tried to sue their way out of their execution, or at least get enough money to, like, stay their execution because they weren't told when they were going to die?
Yeah, in Japan, it's common that they were doing that. I think it's interesting. That's a lot of money to get on your books, $500,000, right?
Yeah,
I don't. Get a nice TV and everything.
Do you think they'd let them have it in prison? Like they're like. Living the life up right before they get called.
Well, it's funny you say that because again, I watch these documentaries about death row inmates all the time, or people who just lifetime. They can make a certain amount of money every year from not from their crime, not from what they did. They can't sell the rights or not, but they can write. There's a few guys that become writers like you, and they make. I think it's like $18,000 to $20,000 they have, which is a lot of money in prison. I mean, if you're going to do a conversion it's. That's like making well over $100,000.
It's a lot of Top Ramen and cigarettes.
Well, it is, and you get a lot of extra food. They get a lot of everything. But I just thought that was interesting. But it's capped. They can't make $1 million in jail. It's about, but you don't need $1 million in jail. So point being, I think what you're saying is that they're politically trying to save their life by putting up a front of this is inhumane.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty scary to be just sitting there for 19 years and all of a sudden you march off to dead man walking. That terrifies me just thinking about it.
Is it humane if you have a death row inmate who doesn't know when they're going to die and you don't tell them and you just show up one day? Like they literally don't get any they don't get any advance notice except like maybe an hour. Like the guards in Japan will show up and tell somebody, it's like, hey, make your peace because we're going to be back in an hour to drag you off. Or they get nothing. They just get dragged off and they don't get, nobody hears from them again. I can't imagine anything crueler. Like sitting in prison not knowing if it's going to be a week or a year or, 20 years. Do I get to write a memoir or am I limited to a Peanuts cartoon before I go?
And then, of course, the victim's family and maybe law enforcement or the justice system will say, well, their victims didn't have a lot of time to decide, right?
Right.
Is that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth?
Yeah, I think the reasoning they give out in the official, the government releases from Japan is it's more humane to not tell them because they'll suffer if they know how long they have. Okay. I think that's horseshit. I honestly, I'm sorry for my language, but I totally believe that it's just easier on the prison. Like it's easier to control the prison population if they don't know when their time is up.
That makes sense. Did you read this article about the death row inmates and how their time is getting longer? How they're not getting executed as fast as they were
in America or in Japan?
In America.
I know that there was some weird snafu about lethal injections. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, yes. The lethal injection thing is becoming a problem because the chemicals they use have different laws in different states. So it's okay to execute someone, but they can't get the drugs to do it. So it's a supply issue. Wouldn't that be great? Like, hey, you can't give me because you can't get the stuff, the stuff to put me to sleep. This is we put this in the show notes. This is a very interesting article. I was watching this program about death row. It's on point to this, and the death row inmate was talking about what it's like to be on death row. And what he was saying was they get very little sunlight, and there's no sunlight inside where they are on death row. And this is in Texas, which is one of the busiest death row. And what he said is you don't know what time it is because they just run meals around the clock and they wake you up at 3:00 in the morning. He says the only way you know what time it is is as soon as they wake you up for dinner or for lunch or for breakfast, you ask, what meal is it? Then you know what time it is.
Oh.
And I thought that was interesting, that we still want to know, even though it doesn't matter if it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. We still as humans want to know.
Right.
This really got me, doing the prep for this show. I thought about there was a serial killer in where we live in Vancouver, Washington, Portland, Oregon. Do you ever remember Wesley Allen Dodd? Do you remember this guy?
No, I don't.
Well, he did horrible things and murdered some children, and he waived all of his rights for all appeals and went right within a year to be executed. Now, Joe, would you want to spend 20 years on death row, or would you want to waive every right and go to the front of the line?
I guess it depends on the circumstances. If I had done something horrendous like kill children, I would know on some level something was deeply wrong with my psychology, unfixably so, and I would be willing to waive rights. Like if I was a doomer and I was like, yeah, no, I'm a monster, I first just do it yourself, but or yeah, if you end up getting caught, yes, I think I would waive rights in that circumstance. Would you?
What if it was let's say it was a crime of passion? Let's say it was an accident that happened. It was a manslaughter that you just made an accident. You made a mistake and somebody died, and you felt terrible about it. But would you want to wait 20 years and live, like I said, not knowing when breakfast, lunch is, living in this thing?
No, unless I had something to fight for. Like if I made prison reform my if I took up the sword and shield and like wrote from prison every day about prison reform and like tried to get published in the New York Times, maybe then I would want to wait 20 years in the hopes that I got some change through or spoke my piece. But if it was just about the waiting, I don't know. I don't know if I could deal with that.
Joe had an interest. I'll see if you. I'm going to quiz you on your own story to see if you remember. But do you remember what you said? Joe's done some volunteer work where he did Toastmaster clubs at a prison, 2 inmates. Do you remember what you told me about how the reception was from the inmates?
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know what I told you, but I remember that everybody who was in the program, they were there to learn to speak better and communicate better and do public speaking, which lowers recidivism. And everybody there was extraordinarily congenial. Like they couldn't have been warmer and nicer to us when we went in to volunteer.
And isn't that nice? And then what that said to me was that you just said they were just so grateful that you guys were taking time out of your lives to come in and help them. They just really showed that, and you felt that. And to me, that says that there's still life in us, even though we've done something horrible, even though we're on death row, we still have some good feelings and good, because to act that way, to act grateful is a sign of what? Happiness. So they are happy when they're in, it's not all bad.
Right. If you are asking, for one, I believe that if you're going to reform somebody and truly try to make them a better part of society, the American prison system is the worst system for it. I think we almost intentionally pervert minds and warehouse people who otherwise should be seeing somebody to help. I don't believe in soft help. I don't think they should all see, like we're joking about psychologists being professional buddies and friends. I think they need actual serious education program help, probably medication. Almost all of the people I've met in prisons, if they are acting erratic or dumb or psychopathic, they need medication and they need they need serious reform and something to basically break them back down to childhood where they originally got broken. But if we can't live with them, it's really, I mean, like you said, if you are a serial killer, I actually do believe in execution. If it's not just the state being aggressively against crime for the sake of politics. I don't think that here in Texas we are necessarily executing the worst of the worst because we have so many terrible people. I think it's because, the governors here get more votes when they are tough on crime. And so we throw the switch on the electric chair because it gets us votes.
Well, so now that's interesting. So this article is talking a lot about what's changed about death row through the years. And there's a trend that's happening right now that's very interesting. It's on point. Is the sentencing from sentence to execution in 2000, for the year 2000, was about 11 years. Fast forward to 2020, now it's approaching closer to 18, 19, 20 years is the average. Now, this is happening for a lot of different reasons. The biggest reason being the whole country seems to be kind of softening its stance on who it sentences to death. More people are getting life sentences. Part of it's financial because it actually costs more. It actually costs more to execute somebody than it does to keep them in life or prison for a long time. But what they're finding, Joe, is that a lot of these people are being executed now. Their crimes happened in the 70s and 80s. And it just seems like over time, people forgive. People soften their stance on it, even the victim's family. So does that mean that time really heals everything?
Okay, that is a really good question. Did you ever do anything you regret when you were young, but it was so far ago that you actually forgot your reasoning for doing it?
Yeah. 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 I have some regrets. Yeah.
I have a couple, and I don't remember why I did them. I now know, I can say that there was one time where I threw somebody under the bus at a job I worked at when I was very young, and it ruined their life temporarily. It was they needed that job. They ended up getting fired. I felt terrible, but I don't remember exactly what my rationale was. I wouldn't have gotten in that much trouble anyway, and I feel horrible about it. but it happened so long ago. Like it was almost at this point, like I was a teen, so like I physically wasn't the same person.
It was a different person that did that. I do feel that way about some things I've done that I'm just not that person anymore. And not that I'm perfect now, but I would never. It's funny, it's funny. There's things that you've done that you would never do now. The things that you did every day that you would never do now.
Right.
You know.
So can I walk you through more like the philosophy of what we're talking about in the movie The Shawshank Redemption? Morgan Freeman's character says, do I regret what I did? He's like, I was a different person. He's like, I wish I could talk to that kid, but I can't. I don't even know that person anymore. Yeah. There's this thought experiment called the Ship of Theseus. Have you ever done this or heard of it?
Never heard of it.
Okay. So we're gonna spend 5 minutes navel gazing and torturing other people. It's a very old thought experiment. It's from Old Greek, and the idea is Theseus, a hero, is sailing home across the Mediterranean, and he has a ship, and at some point a storm knocks out his mast, and they have to like saw down a tree and replace it. Is it still the Ship of Theseus? Does he still own it? Is it his ship? Is it the fabled ship that won whatever battle he's coming from?
I think so.
Okay.
It's a symbol. It's a symbol, right?
Yeah, it's a symbol. And then, a week later, a sea serpent rakes the side of a ship, takes off almost literally every plank on the outside of the ship. They beach it, and they manage to rebuild it with like planks they find, and they season it on the beach, and they get it going again. Is it still the Ship of Theseus, even though now the outside skin and the mast have been replaced? Is it still his ship?
Yes, it is.
So then we keep the experiment going. At some point, beetles get in, or rot sets in, or whatever, and they have to replace the inside because the inside timbers are now the oldest thing on the ship. At this moment, they have replaced every stick and timber and nail in the ship. Is it still the Ship of Theseus?
No, now it's
now it's Bob's ship.
I was going to say it's from Home Depot now, so no,
it's the ship of Home Depot. So that's the death row logic. It's you and I, as humans, every 7 years, our cells slowly replace themselves, or at least their parts. Like the cells in your body, their component parts take about 7 years to replace. To just be totally replaced. Like your cells divide, the old ones get ejected or eaten, autophagy happens, or your brain ejects old carbon as a waste, and like spinal fluid flushes it out. like you every 7 years, you're literally a different person every 7 years. Your hormones change. That's probably why we're not as dumb as we were when we were young, although I still will do a lot of dumb things for fun.
The 7-year itch, right? With you want to change jobs, change relationships, change where you live.
Exactly. And not only that, your memories physically change. They've done studies where they'll have people look at they'll recall memories, and they'll try to recall detailed colors, and they have found that your memories literally fade in color vibrancy or light vibrancy. So, like, you don't even have the same memories of what actually happened.
Detectives have said that about eyewitnesses, that eyewitnesses are terrible witnesses, that their memory of what happens has changed. It is not correct. Even though they were physically there and saw this traumatic event, you would think it would be tattooed, stained in there. No, it changes.
Yeah, that's actually how or why I keep getting kicked out of jury duty. I was on a panel to do jury duty for a very extreme case, and it was dependent on an eyewitness, and they asked everybody. I almost tainted the jury pool single-handedly because they started asking me about, can you convict somebody on eyewitness testimony? And I started talking about verbal priming and memory vibrancy, and like,
Yeah.
and they rushed me out of there. They're like, "No, get out!" Yeah,
I just see the attorney going, for fuck's sake, who is this jabroni? I could just see you with one of those wigs on from the friggin' English wigs. I could just see you just really loving your moment in the spotlight there, Joe. What a jackass.
Excited for jury duty. The only person that wanted to be there and talk about this stuff. I was gonna have a podcast from jury duty. It's just, they wouldn't let me bring in the equipment. But that's the question we're asking is, if you're on death row and it's been 20 years, you all of your cells have changed, your hormones have changed, your memory has changed. There are,
and the structure. Your life has got such structure that everybody does well in that, you know.
Yeah.
And having a routine and not being separated from there's always some mental health and addiction issues involved in these things. Well, it's 90% of the time, right?
Absolutely. With some luck, that they're not only has their mind and hormones changed, they're not on whatever addictive substance they were on when they're on the outside. And there's that whole yarn of like when somebody comes into like their parole hearing and they say, "I see my victims, every time I close my eyes," which physically just isn't true. Just the way memory works, like they can see the narrative of what they've done and whatever image they've tried to hold on to,
and we know that we can't remember people that were very close to us. I mean, we do, but we don't, right? We don't remember them that well. They're gone.
Yeah. There was one of the quotes in the court testimonies and the guys in Japan who didn't know when they would die, and he said you wake up without warning one day and you die for a narrative or a story that you're not even connected to anymore. Which, I mean, that's kind of the problem, is if we're going to execute people. You started with the question of, would I want to sit on death row for 20 years? My answer was basically a roundabout, only if I had something to do. But honestly, it's unfair, or at least foolish, to warehouse somebody, pay for them, and keep them around for that long if you're just going to kill them in the end for something they honestly at that point can't repent for.
You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, feedback, and blog articles for each of our episodes.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.